There is literally nothing more personal than your decision to have kids. Yet there is no other deeply personal topic that family, friends, and even complete strangers feel entitled to ask you about. Just think about what they're really asking with that question. Are you and your partner currently raw-dogging enough to have kids to be just as miserable as we are? Look, I'm just kidding about the miserable part, barely. And as with all topics in the political world, the question of whether or not to have kids has become a hot button issue, especially when AOC is involved in the conversation.
There's scientific consensus that the lives of children are going to be very difficult. And it does lead, I think, young people to have a legitimate question. You know, is it okay to still have children? And I mean, not just financially, because people are graduating with $20,000, $30,000, $100,000 worth of student loan debt, and so they can't even afford to have kids in a house, but also just this basic moral question, like, what do we do?
AOC's comments really ruffled some feathers, including conservative host of The View, Abby Huntsman.
It does concern me that there's even a way to defend the question she's asking, because there's a difference in caring about our climate, which I would argue probably everyone in this room cares about the future of their kids and their grandkids and the air they breathe. Yeah. And asking a legitimate question about doing away with the human race. Last I checked, we elect politicians to come up with solutions, not to just do away with everybody. Of all the things she said, this is by far, in my opinion, the most outrageous, the most absurd.
But aren't you taking it even further than what she took it? She's asking the question. And isn't that question legitimate?
Do you know what? The Democratic Party should make this their platform. They should ask that question.
It will be on the platform.
Good luck.
Okay, Abby, relax. No one is calling for an end to the human race other than Republicans who still refuse to acknowledge the reality, severity, and urgency of climate change. AOC brings up a genuine concern that many millennials, myself included, have when it comes to deciding whether or not to have children. Even if you can get past the insane costs and the lack of support in America when it comes to having kids, how do we just ignore all the various crises that we don't seem to be taking seriously? Abby Huntsman already has a little girl and she's expecting twins, so it only makes sense that she would get defensive after hearing AOC's comments. But instead of unleashing venom toward a politician who happens to be revealing what a lot of us are currently thinking, Huntsman should be way more angry at the inaction toward climate change. But at least Huntsman didn't go as far as Republican Senator Mike Lee, who recently demonstrated the full scale of right-wing stupidity on the Senate floor.
Mr. President, this is the real solution to climate change: babies. Climate change is an engineering problem. Not social engineering, but the real kind. It's a challenge of creativity, ingenuity, and most of all, of technological innovation. And problems of human imagination are not solved by more laws. They're solved by more humans.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we have plenty of humans in the world. I'm also pretty sure that humans cause climate change. Humans are also the ones standing in the way of the engineering miracles that Senator Lee is touting. My view of humans is pretty dim, and I can say that I certainly don't think we can need or could use more of them, especially when it comes to solving climate change. I know, I'm pessimistic. Anyway, I did want to approach the topic about whether or not to have kids from a climate change perspective, but I also want to tackle the judgments toward couples who choose to be child-free. Because believe it or not, deciding not to have kids is still something that people have a lot of disdain toward. In 2017, Leslie Ashburn Nardo, an associate professor of psychology at Indiana University, published a study on the perceptions toward childless couples. According to Broadly, she recruited 197 psychology students and gave them each one of 4 versions of an anecdote about a married adult's decision to have children, with variables accounting for gender and whether they had 0 or 2 kids. Participants were then asked to rate how psychologically fulfilled they thought the subject was. In another set of questions, researchers asked if and to what extent participants felt disapproval, angry, outraged, annoyed, and disgusted toward the subject. Turns out the participants in the study viewed those who were voluntarily child-free as, quote, significantly less psychologically fulfilled than targets with 2 children. The study's participants also reported, quote, significantly greater moral outrage toward them. In other words, even as less millennials decide to have kids, even with the birth rate dropping, even with all the acknowledgement regarding, I should say, the insane difficulty and financial stress of having kids, parenthood is seen by some as a moral imperative. In other words, not having children is seen not only as atypical, but also as wrong. Again, this study was published in 2017. Ashburn-Nardo writes that the outcome of the study has a lot to do with norms and expectations. When people violate strongly held norms and expectations, such as those regarding parenthood and interest in children, there are potentially serious consequences. This backlash is justified in the minds of perceivers because the targets are thought to have brought it upon themselves by not fulfilling their expected roles. Morality is a fascinating component of this. Oftentimes, the main criticism that revolves around childless by choice couples is how selfish they allegedly are for not having kids. I've thought a lot about that as someone who's happily married and enjoys being around my nieces and nephews more than anything. I find that the selfish route is choosing to have kids despite all the convincing arguments against it. I think about climate change, today's unbearable and seemingly endless political divisiveness, the cost of college, the cost of childcare, income inequality, and a host of other issues that convince me that my own child wouldn't have a good life in today's climate. My instinct is to have kids, but instincts often clash with critical thinking. Is it moral to bring kids into a planet that's suffering from extreme weather conditions exacerbated by climate change? Is it moral to bring new life into the world who will inevitably experience the near impossibility of upward economic mobility due to a rigged financial system? I guess these views are selfish depending on how you look at things. You can call couples like me and my husband selfish because going through all the trials and tribulations of today is already stressful enough for us. I can't imagine what it would be like to be consistently and constantly worrisome over my own kids and what they're going through.